Hey everyone, I'm John from Just Home Brew, and this is a follow-up video from a video I posted last year that tested the Anvil Foundry boil time speeds. This time I'm going to compare how two Anvil Foundries perform at 240 volts and 120 volts on an actual brew day. Stick around to see if 120 volts can keep up with a 240 volt Anvil Foundry. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you find this video helpful. You might have seen my friend Matt in previous videos. I brew with him often, and he picked up a 10.5 gallon Anvil Foundry, and he brews at the 120 volt power setting. We brewed earlier this year, and I thought it was a great opportunity to compare these systems side by side. We prepped both our systems the night before, and we set a delay timer so the strike water would be ready as soon as we walked out to brew the next day. I set my Anvil Foundry, which is running on 240 volts, to start in 11 hours, and Matt set his Anvil Foundry to start in 10 hours to give him an extra hour for his system to bring his water up to strike temperatures. So the next morning we walked out in the garage and both the Anvil Foundries were set at 170 degrees ready to mash in. Based on my test last year, Matt shaved off about 40 or 50 minutes of his brew day by taking advantage of this delayed timer feature. Even though we started the night before, I started the official brew day timer as soon as we started to mash in. Mashing in took about the same amount of time. It didn't require any additional power. We already had our strike water ready to go, and the temperature of the grains brought the temperature to our mash temperature. One slight difference I noticed between the systems during mash is that I had to dial back the power percentage to around 60 or 70%. For the first 30 minutes, I had to play with that a little bit so I didn't overshoot my target mash temperatures. Matt's Foundry, that's running on 120 volts, was set at 100% power, and he really didn't have a problem keeping his target mash temperatures throughout the mash. So after we were done mashing, we both sparged and started to ramp up to a boil. At around 2 hours and 15 minutes into this brew day, I was at a boil and Matt's Foundry was at 182 degrees. While Matt's Foundry was still coming up to a boil, I went ahead and started adding my hop additions. At 2 hours and 52 minutes, Matt's Foundry came to a boil, so that was an additional 37 minutes it took his system to come to a boil at 120 volts. One performance difference I noticed between the two systems is that I could achieve a rolling boil with the lid off. Matt, with his 120 volt Foundry, had to put the lid back on to achieve a rolling boil. Not a big problem, but it's something he'll have to consider in terms of a boil off rate when he brews on this system compared to mine. One thing to note, it was 20 degrees out on this brew day. I'm not sure if a warmer day would help the performance of the 120 volt system, but it's one thing to consider. At 3 hours and 15 minutes, I was done with the boil and I started to cool down the wort with my immersion chiller. At 3 hours and 31 minutes, my wort was chilled and I started to transfer my wort into my fermenter. At 3 hours and 59 minutes, I was done with the transfer, I cleaned and sanitized my equipment, and it was ready to be put away. And right at that time, Matt was done with his boil and he started to cool down his wort with the immersion chiller. Now, I didn't capture the time it took for him to cool down his wort and transfer into his fermenter, but based on my time, it took him an additional 30 minutes to complete this process. I had three big takeaways from this comparison. One, the delayed timer feature really helped the 120 volt system keep up with the 240 volt system. It leveled the playing field in terms of the mash time because both systems started at the same time. And it had no effect on the brew day because it automatically kicked on the heating elements, getting both systems up to speed at the same time. My second takeaway, the boil rates are going to be a little different between these two systems. The 120 volt system had the lid on and the 240 volt system had the lid off. I don't have the official tests, but there's going to be a slight difference on the boil off rates between these two systems. And my third takeaway, the 240 volt system was actually a little trickier to keep at target mash temperatures. I had to play around with the power level between 60 and 70%, and for the first 30 minutes, I had to dial in that percentage to make sure I didn't overshoot my target mash temperature. The 120 volt system seemed to be really happy at the power level set at 100% all the way through the mash. So that was our experience on these two systems. To recap, Matt's 120 volt Anvil Foundry took about 37 additional minutes to complete his brew day. Even though it took a little bit more time for Matt to finish his brew day, I don't really feel it affected our brew day experience. Matt doesn't plan on upgrading to 240 volts in his garage anytime soon, but I'm really happy with brewing at 240 volts in my system. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you found this information useful. See you next time. Cheers.